Today, we're going to be kind of showing you changes to the Contentstack platform that is more focused towards developers and kind of more technical. And then later on, we'll be sharing the business track, which will be more for the content managers and things that are changing or moving around from the previous classic UI into the Venus UI. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and share this. Perfect. So here is the Contentstack Venus UI. It's our newest and greatest UI that everyone should start using or migrating over to. I'm just going to be kind of highlighting things that might have moved a little bit or changed, and things that you'll be seeing that are different on here than in the previous UI. So to start off, we're going to start with in the top right-hand side. You may notice that we have this help icon. It was there previously in the classic UI, but there are a few more buttons in here that are a little different. So you may notice the chat with support, which is nearly identical. This is how you get our 24/5 support with our support team. We have a leave feedback, which is how you can leave feedback on the new UI and share your thoughts and feelings. You're able to do screen recordings and screen captures inside of here to leave feedback with. We have our What's New tab. So this is where you can find everything that's being released with Contentstack and find a whole log of everything that's been going on. So if I go ahead and click on here, you'll see a scrollable list of all of our recent announcements and deploys to our platform. We have our documentation button, which will lead you to our developer docs and other docs based on whatever you are looking for. So if you go on and click on that, it'll take you to our docs website. And from here, you can go ahead and navigate wherever you need to go. We have our status page, which shows you the current status of Contentstack. And then we have our brand new community channel, which many of you may not be familiar with, but we've recently deployed a community channel where you and like-minded customers, as well as our internal organization, others can go ahead and ask questions in a community. Inside here, you can collaborate with others and see what others are looking into and how you can respond to them. And if things are relevant to your use case, maybe you can find it in here. So you can see, some really good discussions going around global fields here, but there's tons of questions that might be useful to your org. And if there isn't, then you can go ahead and ask a question and hopefully someone can give you an answer. You'll be able to see events that are coming up at Contentstack, leaderboards for people that are answering the most questions. And at the top, you'll actually be able to navigate through different discussions and knowledge bases. So you can find previous recordings and help like knowledge 101 guides and things of sorts inside this community channel. So it's a really strong, tool for you to get started, or if you have any questions that you're uncertain about, you can go ahead and ask here and see how other customers or our internal organization would do things. Great. So I'm going to go back to our UI, and you'll see our stacks here. This is kind of our general layout that we had from the old to the new, but you might notice a few buttons on the left-hand side. So we have our new automations hub, we have our marketplace, and we have our developer hub. So these are all new tools that are in the Venus UI, and we're going to kind of jump into each of them and kind of describe what they are, how they work, and like why they're really important. So to start off, we're going to go into the marketplace. So our marketplace is a new spot for you to basically install applications to your stacks, find starter apps, automations, which we'll talk about in a little bit, as well as guides that'll show you how to integrate different platforms into Contentstack. If you've been working with Contentstack previously, you're probably already experienced or have experienced our extensions that are located inside a stack. But we've kind of revamped that idea and we've turned it into apps. Many of you are probably familiar with app stores on many different platforms, but they are basically one-click installs for you to install into your stack or into your organization. So if I go ahead and click on View All Apps, you might see some services that you already use today or things that you're not using that could be useful. And these are integrations with other services, as well as just custom extensions that could help your workflow and optimize how you work inside of Contentstack. So for example, if I wanted this developer tools, which provides a code sample and preview of the JSON before I have to deploy it anywhere, I can go ahead and click on this. All I would have to do is click on install app, and then it would have you select which stack that you want this to be installed on. So I already have this installed on the stack that we're going to be demoing, and then you'll be able to use it within the platform. So it's a lot more easy and more user-friendly to use apps than it was to use extensions. And hopefully over time, these are still being released, and we're going to be releasing more and more plugins for you or apps for you to use as time moves on. Next up, we have our starters. So the starters are a great way for you to spin up instances of Contentstack and see how content is delivered in different tech stacks. So if I go ahead and click on View All Starters, you can actually see different tech stacks using Contentstack, and you can actually click on one and view the demo, and you can actually start using the starter apps and seeing how the code works and how you're actually fetching content from Contentstack. We have our automations, which I'll jump into a little bit later, but as stated before, like in the app section, these automations are a way for you to do a one-click install of automation into your organization and configure those for your stacks, but we'll be talking about that shortly. Once you have apps installed, we have a manage button in the top left-hand side. If I go ahead and click on there, you can see all of your installed apps for your organization, what kind of app it is. So if it's for the stack or the organization as a whole, you have audit logs to see what's being installed and what's been removed and things of sorts. You have the authorized apps section. So I'll be talking about this with automations, and you'll be able to just have a whole audit log of everything that's going on across all your stacks in this manage tab. So alongside our marketplace, you're probably wondering, how do I build these apps? Like, where do these apps come from? And that's where this developer hub actually comes in. So inside marketplace, you can actually click on this build new app in the top right-hand side, or just click on the developer hub. And inside here, you can create a new app. So we have some already constructed for you to show. And when I click inside one of these, you'll get some basic information about what the app is, the UID and status, and icon and all the fun stuff. You'll get the UI locations, so where this app is currently hosted. So for example, this asset is hosted locally by myself, but if you were to deploy it to a different server, you could just point to where that lives, and your app would render based on the applications that you specify. So previously, our extensions SDK, you would have to build multiple extensions to put them in different locations. With the new app SDK, we kind of do some code splitting. We have all the documentation online in our app SDK documentation. So this is where you'll find how to actually build these apps. But you can actually build multiple apps for different locations within a single project. So you don't have to actually build out multiple extensions. You can kind of do it all in one project and deploy a stack, a dashboard app, a custom field, an entry, sidebar widget. So you can build all of these into a single repo and deploy them all at once instead of having to build many different applications. We have webhooks for the apps, so if you need to trigger things based on the application, and then OAuth to support the authentication for these apps. So you can find the app documentation on our GitHub or in the documentation on our website, and you can learn more on how to actually build out these apps and deploy them. A really cool thing about the app framework and this whole app SDK is before, if you have a multi-stack approach, or you are working across different digital properties in these stacks, and you want to use the same extensions, you would generally have to go through each stack and create the extension, upload the code, and do that over and over and over again. Anytime there's an update, you have to redo the source code for each stack. With this app framework, you can actually just deploy once and it'll deploy across all the channels, and you can install it across all your stacks, so you can keep them all up to date. Perfect. So that covers the marketplace and the developer hub and how those two are kind of attached at the hip. Next up, we have our automations hub. We made a fairly decently large announcement about this, but many of you may have not seen this before. Automations are a great way to do a no-code integration between many different services. So when I navigate into automations, you'll see in the top right, we have a new project. So you can create a new project for different kinds of automations. If I click inside here, I have two very basic automations that can kind of just give you an idea of what we can do. And then kind of you can think of other things that you may to do, and you can connect those pieces together. So right off the bat, you'll see we have some projects right here. I just have one of them active. I'm going to click inside one of these automations. And this very simple automation is a workflow trigger that goes ahead and publishes my entries automatically based on the state that I change it to. So when you go ahead and create an automation, you'll actually have to create a trigger. And so for this trigger, I'm saying that whenever we change a workflow state or stage on a certain stack and on a certain content type, and on a certain stage of the workflow, so whenever I change it into production, let's go ahead and do something. It's kind of like a webhook. Let's fire off an action so that it can fire the next steps. So whenever this workflow stage changes, we'll move on to publish entry. And here we take the previous data of the content type UID, the entry UID of the stage that's changing, and which environment we want to publish this to. And so if I wanted to, I could add even more steps and say I needed to connect this with a different service. Here are all the actions that we support today out of the box. And this is a brand new feature that we're still deploying new integrations all the time. So if you don't see it here, it doesn't mean it's never going to be there. There's a possibility for it. But you can see all the different integrations we have. So you can connect with all these different services and create automations between them. So just going to scroll down this slowly. And we do have some things outside of just connections to different services. We have our HTTP connector. So this is a great way for you to connect to a service that you don't see supported out of the box today. So if you see some integrations that you want to work with and you want to build something that's not supported, you can go ahead and fire up servers somewhere else that can listen to these requests. And you can do some middleware processing and send that data back with this connector, so you can kind of build your services outside of it if you need to. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this step to keep this automation running, and I'm going to give a little demo of just this basic automation. So if I actually come into my stack, which we'll kind of go over all this stuff in a little bit, but let's just go into the landing page where this is located. I'm going to go into this customized page. So right now you can see that it's already published to production. So I'm actually going to unpublish this right now, and we'll go ahead and schedule that. Unpublish, perfect. And I'll come back and you can see now that the published version on production is no longer there. I'll go onto my workflow details. I'll set stage. I'll move this to production. We'll go ahead and save this. So now that if let's say that I was building this entry and I moved through the phases into production and everything was cleared and reviewed, I can go ahead and look at the status now. We'll do a little refresh here. We'll look at the versions, and you can see that it was published to production right now at 8:17 a.m. for myself. So this is a really basic integration about how automations can speed up workflow processes or just your general process in Contentstack. But there's a lot more possibilities you can build with them. Another example I had with the automations was like a new entry notification to Slack. So if you were, publishing content and you wanted to be notified when things were being published or other events, you could build a Slack integration, basically to send a message to a certain channel with whatever message that you want to post. So that way it's informative and you're updated outside the platform based on your organization's needs. So when I go back to Marketplace now, if I scroll down to the automation section, you can see that we have some automations already pre-built for you that you can do a one-click install and set up for your stacks. So the one where I automated a Slack message, you can import this to your Slack, into the stacks. You can do localizing of entries. We have indexing for the Algolia search, and then we have backing up entries to S3. So these are just some out-of-the-box automations we support that you can get started with today, or you can start configuring your own. There are some limitations with automations that I think some of the QA team can help with if you're curious, but I'm going to leave it at that for now. Oh yeah, one more thing with the automations I forgot to cover is within the automations tab on the left-hand side, you have your projects, which we already know about, but you also have your execution log. So this is where you can see when these automations actually take place, if they were successful, how long they took, and how many steps they went through. So really nice to see how the automations are working. You have your audit logs will just show changes to automations. So you can see right here, if it was enabled or updated or created, you can see what's going on here. And lastly, we have our connected apps. So this will just show you what apps are actually in use right now. So I've only have the Contentstack app connected because I've only done the workflow publishing automation enabled. But if you were to enable Slack, it would show that Slack's being used. So this way you can track all the technologies that are being used in our automations. If you needed to do some kind of debugging or you needed to see where calls were coming from, you can come check in your automations and make sure things are performing properly, or apps that aren't there should be there, or the vice versa. Perfect. So this kind of covers from a high level the newest features from the dashboard level and the biggest features for developers to start working with. But we're actually going to navigate back to the actual stacks and the settings and tools inside the stacks themselves. That might be helpful for the developers to know exactly where things are located now and the newer features in the stacks that could help them out. So I'm going to go ahead and click in our webinar. So many of you are familiar already with our dashboard. You might notice previously most of the navigation was located on the top, but now most of the navigation is located on the left-hand side, and there's actually hotkeys now. So once you get familiar with the platform, you'll be able to jump around the platform fairly fast and use those hotkeys. So to start off, we're actually going to go to the content model section. The entries creation and asset stuff will be covered later in the business course, but for now we're going to stick to mainly developer topics. So if I go ahead and click into a content model section that we already have, so for example, this landing page, most of you are familiar how the skeleton layout is, how you click on insert a field. There's a step here that you can click and add a field wherever you'd like. Most of the fields are pretty much the same as before. A new field that I do want to highlight is our JSON rich text editor and why it's important. So we have our regular rich text editor, which only returns HTML, but the JSON RTE can return both a JSON structure as well as an HTML structure. And why that's important is it makes it agnostic. So if you create text or any kind of content in a JSON RTE, it's easier for you to digest that content across many different devices and platforms rather than just web. So if you're delivering to a mobile experience or some kind of, digital display, it's easier for you to process JSON than it is rendering HTML and things that don't accept HTML. Another great thing about the JSON RTE is with our new app SDK, you might have seen it before. I didn't really mention it, but I should have, is you can build extensions for our JSON RTE. So if there are features that you need or different functionality that you're not getting out of the JSON RTE, your team can build custom buttons, integrations into it that'll make it a little more robust and fits your company's needs. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this just to show you what it kind of looks like and what the new The settings feature looks like for fields inside a content model or a content schema. Most of your fields will have a basic and advanced tab. Basic's going to be things like your display name, the UID, help and instruction values. And then for the JSON RT, you're going to get these plugins. So for the stack, we have some word counts, some variables. We have a bunch of different plugins that we can add to this JSON RT to make it more robust. And then we have our advanced section. So in the advanced tabs, where you're going to set a little more custom settings, this is going to be where you can select which options you want inside the RTE or which ones you want supported for your users. You can do inserting of objects such as assets, tables, properties, links, and then we have our embedded objects. So what are embedded objects? They are basically references, and you can refer content into the JSON RTE. So you're able to embed references or other pieces of content inside the RTE itself, which is a pretty strong feature if you just have a bunch of content that's modular and you want to move it around without having to retype it in a bunch of different places. You can just embed that content wherever you see fit, wherever there's an RTE. Then we have our mandatory, multiple, and non-localizable fields, which many of you are familiar with already. But this is how you kind of navigate the new settings tab for fields within the content schema creator. In the top right-hand side, we have our labels, and you can actually create new labels inside here for content types and see what label you need to nest this piece of or this content schema into. Next to it, we have our field visibility rules. Here's where you actually create those logical operators to say like what conditions need to follow in order for you to hide these fields. So if I actually go ahead and click on this, whoops. So here it is, the field visibility rules. So right now we don't have any rules defined for this content type, but I can go ahead and click on new rule. And here's where you can create those conditional operators to show and hide different fields within the content layout itself. So when you create an entry based on certain criteria, you can hide or show fields within the schema. We have the settings cog right next to it. So this is how you can edit some of the content type details, the name of it, description, or the type. So single versus multiple. And then that's pretty much the differences inside the Venus UI. Most of it is still standard to the old classic UI. So many of you are familiar with how to actually build out these content schemas with the fields that we provide out of the box. Perfect. And so from this, the content schema creator or the content type creator, we're going to move on to the settings tab, which is in the bottom left. Most of you are probably going to be working with generating tokens and creating webhooks and all these other fun things. So let's go ahead and move over to our settings tab. So in our settings tab, most of these look familiar. There might be a few things here that you might have not seen, but we're going to cover pretty much all of them. So that way you understand what's going on in each tab. We have our environment section. So this looks fairly similar as before. In the top right, this is where you can actually create your new environments. You'll give it a name. If you need to label this environment with a certain color, you can go ahead and choose a color. And then you have your URLs on where these or where this environment lives. So if it's like a staging URL, you would enter the base URL of the staging server right here, or the endpoint. And then when you go actually inside your entries and you're looking for a specific environment to go view, you're able to click straight into whatever URL you've put in right here. Next, we have our languages. So we have some languages already created on this stack. In the top right, we'll actually click on new language. And in here, we have our supported languages. So all the languages that you see here. And if something isn't supported or you're doing a little bit of custom functionality outside the norm, you can go ahead and create a custom language. And inside here, you would just enter the language name And the language code would be what you're basically fetching that language from. So most of them would be like ENUS or ENES. There's a standard to it, but you can create your own language codes in here. And there are actually some in this tooltip guidelines that you have to follow in order to make a language code be satisfied or satisfy the conditions. And then standardly, we have our select a fallback language. So for the custom language, it still requires a fallback language that you would have to choose inside here. Next, we're going to be moving on to our webhooks. And our webhooks are fairly similar to before as well. If I go ahead and click on a webhook that we have, or I'll just create a new one actually. You'll be entering a webhook name, a URL to notify. If you have basic authentication, you can go ahead and enter that here. If you need to create custom headers, you can create multiple or as many as you need inside here. This one's fun. You can notify, you can have different users that you want to notify based on a webhook trigger. So you can enter in a list of emails right here, and anyone that is inside that list will go ahead and receive notifications based on what's being triggered inside here. And then we have our conditional view at the bottom, which is what you're used to. And this is where you can kind of select which webhook you want to fire off based on a certain module. So if I go ahead and select any, and let's just select a certain module, and I can say content type. So I can say whenever any content type is created or updated or deleted, I can go ahead and fire off a webhook based on those actions. And each module has different actions that are based on in the platform. So entry has a little bit more actions than content types because we have the published and the unpublished event as well. So you can go through here and look at all the different actions you can take on these modules. But I'm not going to go over every single one. The documentation talks about all the different actions you can take on them, and then you can also look inside the platform as well. Next, we have our send concise payload. This will basically make the JSON payload be a little bit smaller. It won't contain all the data you need, so it's more of like a notification rather than actually needing data to process on. So depending on the use case that you have, you could either check or uncheck the concise payload. And lastly, we have our enable webhook. Pretty straightforward. This is how you activate the webhook and get it going. Awesome. Next up, we're going to move on to our extensions. So many of you may have built out extensions already within the platform, and that's totally fine. They will still be hosted and living in the extension section. So when you move to the new Venus UI, you'll be able to see your extensions still live and hosted. If you did want to move to the app framework and move over your extensions into the app developer hub, we do have guides on migration processes on how to move those apps over. But if I go ahead and click on one of these, so let's just say this dynamic preview, you can see that the fields that are from the classic UI will still be relevant today. You have your field type, so what's going to be returned from it. If it's multiple, the unique ID for this field. If it was hosted by Contentstack, all your code will still be here, as well as your config parameters. So you don't have to worry about those disappearing when you move over. And like I stated, we do have some guides online on how to move this over to the app SDK and work with the developer hub. So all your extensions will still be living. They should still be functioning properly. And whenever you're ready, the migration process is there, and you can still keep them inside here if you'd like. So you have the best of both worlds. Perfect. Next, we're going to move on to our tokens. So if I go ahead and click on tokens here, same as before, we have our delivery and management tokens. In the top right is where you'll actually create the delivery token. So if I go ahead and click, I'll just use one that we have actually. So you can have the scope of the branches, the scope of the token. So if you are using branches, this is where you would select it. If you're not using branches, you don't have to worry about this. But then we have our publishing environments. So where is this token actually going to be able to fetch content from? And whether that's the development environment or your production environment, you're allowed to pick and choose which token this can actually come from. And then we have the stack API key for this token. This is kind of a global value for everything on the stack, but it's kind of located here as well. And then we have the delivery token, and this is the token that will get you access into the platform to fetch the content. I'm going to move back from here. Next, we'll move into the management tokens. So management tokens are fairly similar to delivery tokens. You'll actually select the scope for it, but you might get a little more permissions here. So one, you'll have to say if it's read or write or just read. And then we have the expiration date. So management tokens can be expired, which is a pretty powerful tool. And you can put it to expire never if you're certain that this token will never need to be expired, or you can select the date when it needs to go. So if you need to give a temporary token or temporary access to someone, you can go ahead and create a token with an expiration date. That way you don't have to worry about rescinding that token or deleting the token. It'll just be gone. Then we have our API key and our management token. So the management token will generate when you click save. And once you kind of lose, you should save the token, because once you click save, it goes away forever. And if you need to find that data, you'd have to pretty much create a new token if you didn't save it somewhere. We have our GraphQL Explorer. So for those of you that are using GraphQL, you can actually go inside here and create queries, see what you can generate out of it, and see what's available to query on. So it's a great place to just see how you want to structure your data. If you want to combine multiple content type calls together, just go ahead and explore inside here and see all the possibilities of requests you can make with GraphQL. The next thing I want to talk about is our live preview feature. This is a really cool feature that I think a lot of customers and prospects are really interested in. So this live preview tab will allow you to see your content in real time on your web pages or your digital properties. Actually, right now, just the web pages, and see what your content looks like before you click save or publish. There are some limitations to live preview and who it actually could work for, but we have all of those limitations in our documentation that you can research to see if this is something that would work with your team or not. But basically, once you enable live preview, you can say which environment or the default environment you want live preview to work in. So generally, it would be in a development stack or a staging stack. You wouldn't really want it in a production environment. And then the default URL where this content is living. So how this works is we have a new live preview utility package that works in hand with our SDK. Whoops, I don't know why this is not going in. Anyways, we have a new live preview utils package that works hand in hand with our SDK to kind of facilitate and track these changes. So that way it's not affecting your environments or the data in your environments. It's kind of working on the side. And all those changes are being tracked outside of where your content's actually being published. If I move into an entry, so let's just say a homepage, for example, on the right-hand side, you'll see this live preview button. A lot of this will be covered as well from a business side in the next talk track. So you got to listen to Jaime. He'll give you a great rundown of this as well. But if I go ahead and click on live preview, you'll see a website that is relevant to the entry we currently have running. And I can go ahead and scroll through this. And let's say we actually wanted to change this text right here. You can see these edit buttons, and these come with the live preview utility package on how to actually get these incorporated into your code base. But if I wanted to change this field, all I would have to do is click on edit. It'll take me to the field that's located in this content schema or in this content type. And then if I wanted to actually change this value, I could say, want some help from our experts. They are the best. So you can see the changes are being tracked in real time. And it's actually a really nice experience for your content managers to get a live feedback of what it looks like as they're creating content, so they can create content more efficiently and feel more confident in what they're creating. To get this implementation going, we do have all of this on our doc site. Like I said before, there are some limitations that you'll see in the documentation, but there's ways to get this working with different kinds of rendered sites. So client side, server side, or statically generated content, and you can read it all from there. And last up, I think we've kind of covered pretty much everything. That's all the newest stuff from a developer perspective that you would possibly need to kind of get up and running with Contentstack. We've got the tokens, all the new developer hub and automations and marketplace covered. So these are all new great features that you should go and try today and just work with. And if there are questions, you can ask in the community. It's a great place for you to get started. We also have our in-product support. And if you are a current customer, you could reach out to your customer success team. And I think that's all I have for everyone today. I hope this was informative. A lot of this stuff can be found in the documentation, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. And I hope to see most of you at the next webinar, where Jaime will be going over business related topics and covering more of the platform rather than the developer and technical topics. Thank you.